would really like to hear from some of you on how you would define a successful partnership between product and development teams. What does a successful partnership look like? And I think we've got some really experienced people here. But and if you'd like to speak up, please raise your hand. Otherwise, I do want to just kind of poll the room a little bit and ask Mike Jankowski, what does a successful partnership feel like to you?
Great question. From being new in my product journey, I would say a lot of it comes back to communication. I would say communicating early and kind of communicating often is a phrase I've heard. I've heard a couple. I've heard product management described in a couple different ways, but two that I really come back to is a product person is a master communicator and they're a weaver. So they need to be able to communicate with everyone. They need to be able to communicate with business stakeholders, development stakeholders, engineering stakeholders, and they need to be able to weave that together too. And they need to kind of be able to weave that together and forge a path. So those are kind of what I come back to. But for me, again, being new in my product journey, a lot of it is just coming back to that communication piece, and whether that is happening via agile ceremonies, whether that's happening during stand up or whether that's happening during one-on-ones. That's where I'm seeing a lot of it start. But curious to hear everyone else's thoughts as well.
Absolutely. I thought it'd be really nice to start with you, knowing that you're early in your product journey. And but let's switch. So Stephen Curry, you've got your hand up. Tell us your thoughts.
Well, the thought that comes to my mind immediately is, as a product manager at the time, I can say I was more of a product owner at the time, was definitely having an understanding of the work that they do, what it takes for them to do it, and really what's involved, that you can appreciate the decisions that they make, that it can easily take more than they thought it would. And part of this is, I don't know how you want to work it with your estimation techniques, however you're working things out, but give them the opportunity to give themselves some comfort room on their estimates for the work that what they're planning to do, so they have enough time to get it done comfortably. They don't have to feel like they're automatically going to run over if it takes longer than they thought it should.
Mm-hmm. Marcia, love to hear your take.
Yeah, so I think these are all great points. I would add in there that there's a requirement, if you will, of ensuring that you've got a regular cadence, a discrete process to ensure that collaboration with technology, with engineers. Mm-hmm. In addition to that, I think that ensuring that, estimation is obviously a big part of owning and managing a roadmap. And when you're communicating that roadmap to stakeholders, it's important that you've got that buy-in from engineering. I think that's actually the most important buy-in that you can get. And so I think there's a critical partnership in that estimation process to ensure that, first of all, engineers should be doing that and that estimation process, but product needs to guide that, and product needs to ensure that they have what they need to estimate appropriately for that point in time. And I think, I'm sorry, I don't remember who was talking prior to this, but I do agree wholeheartedly that it's at that point in time, which can change. And I think when those changes happen, it's up to product to ensure that we've identified and communicated the trade-offs and reprioritized, so that engineering understands that, yes, you estimated that, 6 months ago, a lot has changed from a roadmap perspective. We're going to go back, we're going to reevaluate, we're going to understand what the trade-offs are, and if we have to update that roadmap as well.
Yeah, I think you hit one of the really important nails on the head, that the nature of the collaboration and the partnership that really looks successful is when product management and development are aligned on what a release can look like and what a timeline can look like. And one of my favorite quotes from an old VP of development that I worked with was, and dead on accurate, a roadmap that isn't backed by development is a wish list. If it's not backed by development, it's just a wish list. Mike, I saw your hand go back, but you're totally agree with that. And that's a really good senior perspective as well, because you are the stakeholder in many of your roles, Marcia, right? You're a more senior leader, so ensuring that you can trust the information coming from the product and development organization, so that as you're communicating to your stakeholders, it's got buy-in is critically important.
And that's on both sides, right? That's not
Yeah.
just the estimate, but that's ensuring that you're comfortable that engineering knows what the expectation is for delivery. So, one of the key practices I like to follow is we never have different documentation, if you will, for our stakeholders versus our engineers. They need to be seeing exactly what we're sharing, what our designs look like, et cetera, in terms of what we're communicating all around. And they need to be part of that communication.
I love that as a best practice to capture as well, making sure that that you don't ever have different documentation for your stakeholders and your engineering teams. They should be looking at on the same page. That's a great best practice. Yeah. Thank you. Mike, your hand went back up.
Yeah, just to follow up on Marcia's points, Marcia, I appreciate that perspective. I'd be curious to, and obviously I would assume it's going to vary case by case, but I'd be curious to get your perspective on kind of balancing that communication and good relationship with the development team, but with the business team as well, so to speak. Because to give a little context, I was recently in a conversation and there was just very different thoughts as to there was a question that came up, and it was kind of, do we push back on the engineering team and kind of raise the bar for them, or do we push back on the business side? And my thoughts were, hey, I think that we push back on the business side here, because just getting a pulse of the engineering team, they're working really hard. And I think if we throw another thing on them, I think its quality is going to diminish. But the go forward decision was to actually push back on the engineering team and ask them to ramp up a little bit more to get this business stakeholder need met. So yeah, again, curious to get your thoughts on that. I know it's a case by case basis and there's no golden rule that one size fits all, but because again, like hearing you talk, I'm like, yeah, I completely agree with that. But I thought of this scenario where the opposite was decided, that no, we actually need to ramp up engineering, ask them to pick up the pace a little bit to get this business need met.
Type faster.
Can we do it faster? That's always a question.
Exactly.
And I think that you've got to be a partner with engineering to understand, are we for a short period of time going to buy extra pizza and, get folks to, and then, change that capacity, right? The capacity is what gets paired with those estimates in order to build that roadmap. So that's certainly an option, but I don't think that's an option you want to typically go with. I think your capacity, unless you've got the ability to pull in contractors, you've got additional budget, your capacity is what it is, right? And so your estimates are where you really need to hone in on and look at deeply and determine, are we estimating this based on what our vision was? Or, are we misaligned because this estimate looks super high, or maybe it looks super low? And how detailed have you pushed to get an estimate down to the component level, right? To make sure that there's an understanding across the board in terms of what we're trying to deliver. So I would focus more, unless you've got budget that is sliding where you can bring in contractors, et cetera, I would focus more on looking at the estimates and the delivery, making sure you're aligned on that, and starting to question what you can take out of that work to get that out the door more quickly. And I'm constantly doing that type of refinement to identify where you start out with, you got to have everything. And then as you start to look more deeply at the estimates, you start to prioritize as a team. I usually go through a fairly formal prioritization process with business and engineering included so that there isn't any guesswork or folks left out, et cetera, when it comes time to decide what you're doing and when it's going to be delivered.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Don't hear you, Jason.
I just launched a poll based on Marcia's statement just a moment ago. I wanted to just see where everybody sits on that. It looks like we're fairly healthy on the whole in this group, which is nice to see if we use that as a gauge of health. So that's very good to see. Matt, Bettina, go right ahead.
Yeah, I think one of the challenges you have is we have these ideas and we vet them. They may become opportunities for us to pursue. But then, as Marcia said, I really like what she said, that you've got to get it down to numbers and get it into business terms. So you can really see, okay, engineering is like 80% confident or 90% confident in these estimates. Now, how much water can we fit in the fire hose? You know, like, and I think sometimes we're ambitious about what we want to achieve. We throw a lot at the engineering team at once, or we are very ambitious in what we want to achieve out of a sprint, and then we get disappointed when we don't get everything. So I've learned to just scale back a bit and give some room, and try to get a reasonable sense of confidence about some realistic targets that we want to achieve. If there's something that we're trying to take on that has like a fair amount of uncertainty with it, let's remove that from the equation until we can de-risk it. I think a successful partnership with the engineering team looks like it's very trust-based. I liked what some of the comments were about good communication, but making yourself available, just simple things like answering questions when they come up for them and not waiting to answer those questions. I think you really need to project some confidence in where you're going with the product. I always hear from them that like they're not sure where things are headed because this product manager or that person doesn't seem to know where things are going. We're so confused about where things are going, what's going on. They need to see that vision, and they need to see that you've got a bold vision and you've got a plan, and you've clearly laid out how you're going to get there, and invite them to be a part of that conversation so they can help you figure out exactly how you're going to get there. The leadership has to see and have confidence that the engineering team is confident that you can do it, especially if they have the ear of the engineering, or engineering has the ear of leadership, that is. So I think it really is very much a two-way street. I think some of the challenges I've encountered is in a very tech-led organization, the perception that what product management is versus what it really is, and still doing some of that education and trying to refine how the organization does product management according to some of the things we talk about here.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. We still talk to a lot of people every week who say, yes, I'm one of the early product managers at my company, and my leadership was told that they needed a product management function and they needed product management professionals, and they don't know what to do with me yet. I hear that quite a bit.
This is more than Scrum and requirements, and I still find there's a struggle in them either not having the time or wanting to make the time, or leadership seeing the value in them coming to discovery sessions with customers. So we're having to bring the discovery back to them in short form summary, just to try and get it in front of them and show them more of what we're doing.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. How are you going about when you're having to bring that back in that short form summary? Are you using any prescribed formats? One of the things that specifically comes to mind for me is Teresa Torres's interview snapshots that she promotes in Continuous Discovery Habits. That's a document I'm really fond of for bringing the results of a specific discovery activity back in a way that's shareable in the organization. Do you have some key artifacts that you use to share and create alignment with?
Well, I'd like to hear more from others here on what some of those are. I've I've dabbled a little bit in some of Dan Olson's stuff along the lines of how you go about communicating where you're headed with an MVP using the Kano model. I've dabbled with some of John Mansour's um, um, customer success approach based methods, and just still looking for other ways of taking that information and bringing it back, because I'm in the middle of that right now. I got a big
Yep.
deal of discovery notes that I'm now just sort of quick and dirty hacking it together, and then going to filter it out and start pulling stuff into a more digestible format, something that everybody can kind of take a look at on a screen and say, okay, now I understand what these customers are saying. Here's what we might want to go about doing. So I'm interested in hearing from others. What works for you in terms of communicating those discovery results back and the things that you're learning as a product manager to the engineering team?
Gotcha. Cool. All right. Feel free to jump in as you have those. I'll while we're looking for some answers on that and getting and shifting that conversation. Manesh has got your hand up, so Manesh, bring it on in.
I found it successful to spend more time on explaining to the dev team the why behind what we're asking them to do, and how that impacts the business. And I also spend a little bit of time, I guess, showing them the vision of what they're building and how it'll be utilized and what impact will make to the users that are using the application. What I've found with that is that they end up owning a little bit more than just having to do the work and estimating and all the things that we've talked about. They've actually started asking me the tough questions, and they feel like, okay, so you've explained to me why, but you're asking me here to do this. And that kind of seems counterintuitive to what you told me why we're doing this work. And so it catches a lot of the things that we may have overlooked or we just didn't even think about, and it just brings them into the fold, so to speak. And when you bring them into the fold, I've seen a dramatic change in terms of what the outcomes are delivered by the dev teams. And I've worked with multiple teams at the same time, and I can see that just drastically be different from one team and the next, only because we didn't spend enough time to explain why they're working on what they're working on. So I think it's all about alignment, right? I mean, you already said that, Jason. It's just different things that you can do to bring that alignment into play. And in some cases, it's different depending on how old the team is and where your teams are and where you are at. It's just going to be a little bit more different. But the alignment is the real crux of all of that.
Yeah, those are kind of two of the themes that I have heard and observed. One of the top one is I think you said vision, that vision, and having those shared vision and goals across both teams is one of those key themes for creating a real partnership. Because when you have that mutual understanding and agreement that this is what we're chasing, this is where we're heading, it makes it a lot easier to create those valuable conversations that help you actually get there, and those relationships that help you actually get there. Steve, I saw you put your hand down, so we'll go over here to Marcia.
Yeah, I wanted to add to that. I think that's so critical. And when we talk about sharing discovery notes, that's really the start of any new concept development, right? So, what we like to do is typically walk in with, here's what we heard from our customers. Here's the design or the concepts that we've identified to meet those needs. Now let's talk through those and let's poke some holes in them. And maybe there's a better way, a faster way. I'm always looking for faster ways. But getting the input, and asking development the question, is there another way? Is there, I think those are critical conversations to make them, number one, feel a part of it, but more importantly, to sort of catch what might be more advantageous or a different way to do something that maybe the designers or the product folks haven't considered.
Absolutely. I'm a big fan of co-creation in those scenarios, and I've been a big fan of a lot of design thinking practices for a lot of years at this point as well, and workshopping concepts, starting with a problem and working through to identify a potential solution and prototype together with design and engineering and product to create something that's actually feasible in the first place. I can't tell you how many times I've been part of conversations with engineering teams and product teams where requirements or design came over the wall, technical requirements came over the wall, or design came over the wall that was very expensive and very difficult and not necessarily even very feasible. And that created a bunch of thrashing and waste that could have been prevented by getting everybody in a conversation early on so that everybody is aware of constraints and opportunities to build together. So I absolutely agree. Andy.
Yeah, in the same spirit of what you all were saying, and what Marcia was saying, I think one way that we had good success in eliminating the separation between engineering and customers, not just product, but down to customers, was really inviting them to our user group. We had it depended on the time period, but between 2 and 4 user groups a year, and naturally you've got to balance that with bandwidth and projects and things going on. So we didn't bring the whole team or anything like that, but a few representatives. We tried to get at least, not just the managers, at least one kind of frontline, engineer to those meetings. And they asked some great questions. They got to hear from the customer needs right up front, the customer challenges, first person, right? Not just what I said or what my colleagues in product said or whatever. And those were really helpful and benefited the clients in a lot of ways too. Definitely. So
was that a cultural norm for your organization, or was that something that had to be sold and started during your tenure there?
No, it was at least in my part of the business, it was a cultural norm. And it was a large company, so we had many different types of user groups across the different business lines. But I think others, looking at, I was a guest speaker at 1 or 2 other groups, other business lines, and I think there were engineering resources there too. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So fortunately, I didn't have to sell that. Fortunately, so it was already there.
That
built on it.
But that is a fantastic culture. I completely agree with the value. Depending on how your user groups are facilitated and located as well. I know when we ran our user groups at one of the companies that I was at previously, there was always kind of a real hard look at travel budgets. Our user groups tended to be out in other markets, and there was always a reluctance to send too many people from our own organization, or just from a fear of overwhelming customers, and also from a budgetary perspective. But I agree, I believe that the value so far outweighs the cost of a plane ticket and a hotel room to send somebody who's on the front lines in the trenches to get that deeper understanding and affinity with the actual users that they're serving.
Yeah, definitely. And once during COVID, they became, via Zoom as opposed to in person. Yeah, became a no-brainer. We invited a whole lot more.
Absolutely.
So we asked them, not necessarily, we asked them to make sure the customers, had time and bandwidth to be the main ones responding or asking questions. It wasn't their time to ask us questions, but once we had that conversation, we were good. So, yeah.
Yep. Very good. Stephen.
Yes, to what you're saying, I just wanted to mention that when it comes to having some engineers involved in the discovery meetings or the customer focus groups or whatever you're doing, this is also very much reflected as a key point in the Inspire book, that you should always have an engineering lead involved with everything, just to make sure that they can ask the right questions for their own understanding if something isn't mentioned clearly, and bring the insight back.
Yep, absolutely. Fundamental best practice to really kind of drive towards. So thank you. Yep. So we've talked a lot about some of what good looks like and some of the best practices getting to good, but there's also some some hindrances and some roadblocks sometimes. What are some of the challenges that some of you have faced along the way in building and facilitating those? And I find that it's very helpful to talk about the less fortunate experiences to identify the potential roadblocks, the potential constraints that prevent the ideal outcome so that we can be on guard against those. I would love to hear from some folks without naming names or even necessarily companies, some experiences where you haven't necessarily had the strong partnerships or at least some challenges that you've observed that can prevent building those or can get in the way of building those strong partnerships. Does anybody have any stories that they can share?
So I'll talk about one. We didn't really talk about data science, and often data science sits outside of engineering. And I've worked with a lot of data science teams over the years. And I would say oftentimes it's a struggle to get data science kind of incorporated into the process, right? Incorporated into that development process. You might have a well-oiled machine going on, but then you've got data science kind of out there working on their own, not really paying attention to the roadmap, et cetera. So I think that has tended to be a struggle in terms of, how do you kind of bring them into the fold? And it's interesting. And different organizations, I'm curious here, if you guys have worked with data science, and have they typically rolled up under engineering or been separate, as has been my experience?
I know when I was working with a strong data science team, they rolled up under engineering at the most senior level, but at the tactical functional level, they were a completely adjacent organization, and they used their own technology stack. And so we were actually working on some machine learning driven software. And so our data science team would go build what they needed to build in the tools that they wanted to use in order to do the analysis that needed to be done. And then there would definitely be, now how do we actually productize this and deliver it at scale? And in my case, a marketing technology platform. And so that created, because all the work was done on one side of the moat, so to speak, and then brought across the drawbridge into the castle. It's like, well, this doesn't fit here. We have to figure out how to solve that problem from a technology standpoint. And it wasn't from, I think, a lack of desire to collaborate. It was an afterthought. Is that what you have kind of seen?
That is definitely what I've seen. And I think, interestingly, because Agile methodology is so well known, et cetera, it's somewhat easier to bring the process in with engineering, but oftentimes data science gets left out of that conversation. And so I think it's just as important that process is built to incorporate both engineering and data science, understanding what the regular cadence is going to look like, how they're going to get involved in ensuring that we're all aligned on the roadmap, et cetera. So, but yeah, I think that's really critical.
Yeah, I think that's a great call out, and kind of summarizing that. As we're thinking about challenges in building those strong partnerships, is you have to make sure as a product manager that you're fully aware of all the partnerships that need to be part of it. Engineering is not necessarily the Scrum team that you're working with. It's the entire organization that is going to ultimately contribute anything that engineering team is going to need to consume or integrate into the work that is at the front of their mind, and making sure that you're keeping all of those relationships strong and vocal is a big part of the job. It's a great call out, Marcia. Thank you. Mike.
One thing, and this kind of takes me back to my college days in Psychology 1-on-1, is this whole concept of listening to listen as opposed to listening to respond. So when they're talking, as opposed to thinking, okay, here's how I'm going to counteract that point, here's how I'm going to push back. Instead of doing that, and this is something I have to remind myself on a daily basis, because it's still something I'm practicing, but it's fully being present to listen to them and then taking a moment to kind of reflect and respond. Because I've seen I've seen, meetings kind of get derailed that way, where it's the engineering representatives coming in and product is just kind of listening and waiting for their chance to speak to say, here's why we need to do things differently. Whereas I notice sometimes taking that step back and being like, okay, I'm going to fully absorb what you're saying. You're telling me that it is a bandwidth issue. Okay. I obviously don't want you to be burning the candle at both ends. How we can make that work. I've seen good things happen of that, but again, being fully transparent, it's something I need to remind myself of on a daily basis, because I can just sometimes go into a meeting like, here are the points I want to get across, where it's actually, if I go in with more of a blank canvas, like I'm going to really try to listen to what people are saying. Good things can come from that. Easier said than done though, for me.
Yep. Rob.
I have I have a lot of similar experiences to what everyone's saying here. I feel like we're in a 12-step group here. I'm Rob and I'm a product manager. It really comes down to not only do you have to have the vision, you have to really strongly believe it, but you have to preach it to people, and you have to, and we've said this before on the call, even it's the, explain to them what you're trying to do and why you're trying to do it, and to get everybody's input. Marcia is absolutely right when she says data science is a lot of times an afterthought, because when you think about a lot of these products and features that come in, think about it like, one of your customers says, oh, I need this thing. And it comes in and it's fully formed. And then you're asking the question why, and after 5 times you realize, no, that's not exactly what they need. Right. And then you have to go and then you say, all right, well, let's look at the data. What does the data tell us? All right. We understand what they're asking for, the why. Let's look at the data and validate it. Now let's get all of our partners that we work with together to come up with the solution. And a lot of times this is a UX and engineering partnership when you're talking about digital products, where they come up with something, you say, okay, this meets my requirements. I try and write my requirements in such a way that I'm not tying their hands. I'm saying, here's the requirement. It's simple things like, character counts, word wraps, image placement, form fields, like all these goofy things that you do. Just, you're putting on your analyst hat. You're doing those things. And now you're saying to these people, I'm empowering you. This is your job. I'm not going to tell you what to do. I'm saying, if you can fit a solution inside this box, then we're good. And in that case, then you're able to take that step back, but you're giving everybody a seat at the table, and they're going to get, they're going to get, like exactly like what Mike was saying. Everyone gets their say, and you listen, because there's always a bit of truth in there. But at the end of the day, you own the vision. You're going to have to make a call. So if on a good day, everyone's 80% happy, right? But then it's like, okay, business, we heard you. This is what we're doing. Not everything. This is what you're getting. Customer, hey, look at this. You wanted this thing, but we were able to really dig it up and find out, no, you didn't need that one little thing. You needed this big, great, awesome thing, and you built it. I literally just had a call yesterday where I was talking with legal. Legal always, gets short shrift. And then you're like, we did this great thing, and legal says, you can't do that. So you got to make sure you bring in your legal partners. And fortunately, we had thought through it. I had tailored the message to the audience, which is also really good. I had a 15-minute call, got approval, moved on. Partnerships are so incredibly important. And it's, if for more senior product staff, I think it's really important to understand how to cultivate those relationships and how to play the political game, unfortunately. Everybody has it's a what's in it for me. And it doesn't mean that you have to be nasty about it, but you have to understand where they're coming from. So you can say, I'm doing this because I know that this is a need, want, or desire, or a pain point. I'm going to help you with that. And then everybody else gets those. Again, that applies to that 80% solution.
That 80% solution reminds me, I rewatched over the last couple of months. I have binged and rewatched Game of Thrones. And there was a great exchange between Tyrion Lannister and Jon Snow at one point where he's talking about, yeah, nobody really got what they wanted. So it feels like it was probably a good negotiation. So I can't remember the exact quote. I was trying to find it real quick, but it does feel like that sometimes. 80% is a lot better than 50% though. So I like that direction. Yeah. Jerry, how are you, sir?
Hey, how's it going? And in Game of Thrones, if you survived the conversation without getting cut in half, it was a great conversation.
Yeah, right.
This is a throwback, but you talked about barriers. And I know we don't go into the office as much as we used to and what have you, but this is a mindset constraint that persists from the bad old days, which is the idea of a physical department. One of the barriers that I've always noticed about organizations is people tend to stay close to the fire. You know, they build a fire in their department. It provides warmth and light, and in modern offices, they might even have their own break room and their own kitchen, and it creates a psychological potential energy barrier to walking out the door of the department and spending time with other people. And oftentimes, in a lot of offices, there's even a back entrance. So, you can literally walk into your team with your special key and you don't have to see anybody from any other function. So, just be mindful of the hidden barriers. You're probably very mindful of the obvious barriers, open conflict, differences in priorities and things like that. But there are also hidden barriers to collaboration, like the door to this office suite, often can be the biggest impediment to people working with other functions. It's just hard, especially, I don't know what each of your experiences, but I've seen a lot of people, the higher up you get, the further in the back of your department you get officed. So not only do you have to take a long walk to go see somebody else, you got to walk past your team, and people being curious. Well, where's Jason going? Why isn't he here with us, and what have you, or vice versa? Somebody comes to visit Rob or whatever because he's the director. Well, why is Mike here? He's from legal. Are we in trouble? Just normalizing that extra departmental reach out is so important, because it can sneak up on you and become a barrier.
That is a great call out, and I have certainly been guilty. I can think of a time in my career where I was unintentionally and accidentally guilty of that as well. You mentioned the further away you are, and that's a great segue to a topic that I really wanted to kind of think about here for just a moment, because we've got a lot of folks on the call who are in leadership roles, and we got a lot of folks on the call who are in more individual contributor roles. And I'm curious from both perspectives, how does leadership influence the relationship between product and development teams in your experience?
I think that it's the key difference when you think about this is when you say leadership versus management. Going back to those fundamentals, because I've seen folks who are great leaders who are not managers, who are able to build strong relationships. And I think that it's you can have I can think of more than one hand's worth of people that I've worked with who were great leaders, who were really individual contributors, but they built those strong relationships across different departments, and they would make sure that people felt included. And it was whenever you did that, whenever you had that kind of the leadership soft skills, it always helped. And some of that was some of that for me as a leader and a manager is to make sure that my team knows that they're empowered to build those relationships and to explicitly carve out time for people to build those relationships every single week. So like right now, I have 10% of my time allocated to go and talk with people on different teams. So that it's not oh my God, there's legal, Rob's talking with legal, we're all in trouble. It's like, no, legal is part of our team. We have to think of ourselves as the spoke. And there are all these other folks within the organization, within different departments, and we lead them and we serve them. And we help to drive that vision. Why am I doing this? Right? I mean, a 15-minute call, or hey, here's a great kickoff, and it is an all-inclusive kickoff, and it is the biggest cheerleading session ever. But you know what? It rallies everybody, and you get better motivation, and you get people stopping and saying, I have a great idea. I think we could adapt this thing, and we could make this better. And I've seen it time and time and time again that the sooner you do it, and the better you do it, and the more you make people feel inclusive, and you connect people between different disciplines, they work better and faster.
Yep, absolutely. And there are a few things that you kind of hit on in there, but the general overarching theme of just making sure that you're facilitating that connection and conversation and awareness and collaboration is huge. Andrew, you had your hand up and you dropped it back down. We got time. I'd love it if you want to jump in there real quick before we end it.
Building on Rob and Jerry's comments, a leader has to take the initiative to do it and make it happen. So, for example, when we were in an office, I'd see a common break room, and there would be some engineers, goofing off or, chatting, taking their break, and the president would walk in and the others would kind of leave. And it wasn't, they didn't like the president so much. It was just a difference in, it was a little bit of difference or respect for the president. I don't want to hear him, I don't want him to hear us joking around and stuff, or let's give him space to have his own conversation, let him have the break room. So the leaders have to be aware of this and this tendency, particularly with engineers, and go seek them out, reach out to them, allocate the time to have skip levels and build those relationships.
That's a great call out. And that reminds me of another kind of general leadership lesson that impacts those relationships and and those partnerships as well. And a lot of senior leaders forget accidentally that a question or a comment from them to anyone in the organization carries a completely different weight and often has consequences. Just an idle question can have unintended consequences of, well, hey, the president asked me this question, I need to drop everything I'm doing to get an answer, when sometimes that was not the intent. And creating a culture where you have that constant conversation and that ability to get clarification, those skip levels that you're talking about, or making sure that there's time in the break room together so that you've got those affinities, really helps to offset and inoculate against that as well. And that helps keep all the relationships flowing more smoothly. So I feel like we could have gone on even longer on this topic, but we're at the top of the hour, and I really want to thank everybody for sharing your experiences. And there's just a ton of notes over here in the notes document. A lot of great insights and thoughts and conversations that will benefit some of the folks that were on this call and some of the folks that watch the recording later on, and take a look at the notes in our archives later on as well. So I really want to thank everybody for being here today.